ladies and gentlemen, we have a real treat for you today, and that's a real understatement. As you well know, Dr. Peacock and myself, Dr. Wright, we are academic hospitality professors, and our podcast is all about Las Vegas hospitality evolution. And we have brought to our podcast the individuals that have made that happen, whether they've contributed, whether they've interfaced with people that have built some of the largest hotels in the world. 17 of the largest hotels in the world reside right here in Las Vegas. And without any further ado, because we want to get right into this interview, I want to introduce a gentleman that everyone knows in this town. I found that out through my research, and I know him. He is an author, biographer extraordinaire. He has interviewed some of the top people that we have had on our lecture series as well as our podcast that have made this city what it is today. And without any further ado, Mr. Jack Sheehan. And I say that I should be hearing applause everywhere, man.
That's the first applause. That's great.
Well, it's great to be with you guys, and obviously, having been here for 46 years now, transplanted from Spokane, Washington, I'm like a lot of people you've probably met. I came here with one thing in mind and then really never left. I came here to play golf. The weather was great. I was a competitive golfer through college. I went to the University of Oregon, and I'd played in a lot of national amateur tournaments and things like that. And I got here on Super Bowl weekend of 1976, and it was sunny and 70 degrees, kind of like it is today. And I thought, man, oh man, I'm not going back in another week. I'm going to stick around for a while.
Yes.
And here we are all these years later.
My goodness, yes. But you played golf competitively.
I did.
In the Big Ten against Stanford.
Well, it was the Pac-8 back then.
Pac-8, yes.
It was the Pac-8.
Yeah.
I played at Oregon, and we played in the Nationals every year in the NCAA. And we comported ourselves well for a wet weather school.
Oh,
we
yes.
weren't beating Houston and Arizona State and Florida, but we were beating everybody that came from cold climates. And I've still maintained really close relationships with all the guys on that team. I'm fortunate. Two of them, Mike Davis and Pat Fitzsimons, transplanted to Las Vegas. They got smart,
yes,
and called me before they came and said, what's it like there? And I raved about it, of course. And so I have friends from college that are here, and then, of course, Carol and I have made millions of new friends in the last 25, 30 years.
Yes. And so anyway, you landed here. Then what?
Well, I honestly had left a job. I had a master's in English.
Oh, good.
So I had a good education. I suspected that I wanted to make a living as a writer, self-employed, hopefully at some point, but I wasn't sure. And I gave up a pretty secure sports writing job at the morning newspaper in Spokane. And I was single, and the money was pretty good. And it was, I hate to say this, it was almost too comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It was my hometown. I was writing about people I knew. I was covering golf and college basketball and football and all that. And I got a great education the 2 years I was there. But as much as I love sports, I knew that I didn't want to limit myself to writing about sports. I wanted to write about anything I found interesting. And I knew that if I stayed at the newspaper, I could maybe retire in 40 years and get the gold watch and the cake and the nice luncheon. It just felt too safe. So part of the reason I came to Las Vegas was I'd been here one other time on a golf excursion, and I loved it the 3 or 4 days I was here. And I always knew I got to go back and see this town again, get a better feel for it. So that's why I came back in '76. I'd have to say I was looking for a place to be a writer full time. And if I didn't find it, the people at the Spokesman Review, which is the morning paper, were really nice. They said, If you don't find what you're looking for, we'll take you back. So they gave me the security blanket of knowing I could have my job back if I wanted it, which was really nice. And the truth is, I had about $3,000 in my pocket when I got here, and I burned through that quickly. Cocktails, girls, shows, whatever.
Yes.
You
And
didn't gamble or anything.
no, I didn't. I did not gamble, but
Because I wish I would have met you then, because I could have told you how to double your money in this town. You fold it up and put it back in your pocket.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're going to be giving me gambling tips. I ended up in the belly of the beast because when I ran out of money, I had a friend that I was staying with who was a former golf pro who was a baccarat dealer at the Flamingo. And he said, what are you going to do? You're out of money. Or I probably had $500 left. And I said, I don't know, but I don't want to go back. I just didn't want to swallow my pride and go back and say, well, I didn't find anything, and here I am. So I'd been here a couple months, and he said, I can teach you how to deal 21, and I'll teach you how to do it on an ironing board.
Oh, for goodness.
Which he did. In his condo, he taught me how to, cut chips and count to 21 and you double down and, how to pay off a blackjack, 1.5 times and all that good stuff. And I learned it quickly enough that I got hired at the Four Queens. And I worked the 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. shift, which for a guy who grew up as a Catholic boy getting up at 6 in the morning, it killed me. I mean, I was just, I was worthless because my body clock was just flipped upside down. But I made enough money to stick around, hung on to a few bucks. And I was dating a lady at the time that said, you're a nice guy, but you're miserable in what you're doing. And you've got a master's in English. This was the greatest tip ever. She said, why don't you go over to UNLV and see if they need English teachers? And I thought, well, it's like 3 days before Labor Day and the start of the fall semester. And I stumble over there. I'd been to bed about 5 in the morning. It's like 8 in the morning, and I probably looked like death warmed over. I walked into the English department. I'll never forget the neat lady, Jackie Brantley, was there, and she dated Alex Haley for a while.
Oh, my God.
The Roots author.
Yes.
Jackie was a really attractive African-American lady, and she was the secretary in the English department. And she said, why are you here? I probably had a Hawaiian shirt on, a pair of jeans, looked like hell. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I have a master's in English, and I'm just inquiring to see if you have any openings for English teachers. She said, don't go anywhere. And she picked up the phone. She called a guy named Herman Van Betten, who was the head of freshman English. She said, Herman, I've got a guy here who wants to teach freshman English, and he's got a master's degree. And all of a sudden, I'm very welcome in the building. It's in the humanities building. And so I walk over to Herman's office just around the corner, and he starts interviewing me. He says, we're over-enrolled in freshman English. This is English 101, basic essay writing. Perfect. And he said, what's your background? I said, well, I have a master's. He said, who'd you do your thesis on? And I said, well, the great Oregon author, Ken Kesey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and sometimes...
Yes, of course.
Herman said, never heard from him. Never heard of him. He was a Dutch guy. That's a bad Dutch accent. And I said, look him up. He's a great writer. And he goes, okay, never mind. How many classes can you teach? This is honestly... I don't have a degree. I don't have a degree on me. I said, how many you got? He said, can you teach 7, 8, 9, 10, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, freshman English? I didn't even ask him the pay. This was my way out of the gaming business. Yes. And I'm thinking to myself, I get off at 5, and I have to start teaching at 7 in front of 30 kids, and I have to make sense. And I did it, and I held both jobs for like 2 months. Things you can do when you're young. Right?
Yes, Only when you're young.
So only when you're young. And so I did that for a couple months. It allowed me to save money from the 2 incomes. And as luck would have it, in December of 76, I'd been here less than a year, a guy comes into my office and says, I'm starting a city magazine. We're going to call it Las Vegas City Magazine, and I understand you're a writer, and I can't pay you anything, but can you do some articles for me? Yes. So I'm getting paid nothing, basically, to be a part-time English instructor. I'm making probably $60 a day dealing 21. I'd already quit that job probably a month before. And so I ended up being the editor and publisher after a year or two of Las Vegas City Magazine for 11 years. We had the Running Rebels on the cover every year. It's how I got to know a lot of the guys that you're so close to, Sid Green and Reggie and Eldridge Hudson and all those guys. So the beauty of that was I'm teaching the English language from the ground up, freshman English, grammar, punctuation, diction. To this day, I know every rule for using a semicolon. And I didn't know all that when I was just studying English, because you're reading novels and writing papers on Shakespeare and Chaucer and all that. But I didn't have an expertise in grammar and punctuation. I just could write papers, and I kind of knew where the punctuation went. But when you teach, you have to learn it, or you're going to look like an idiot.
That's right.
So the combination of being able to write about any topic I wanted in this city magazine, crime, politics, sports, restaurant reviews, I mean, everything under the sun. And I figure this is all good. This is all going to help me. And it turned out that in those, actually the 11 years that I was in the city magazine business, it was like my doctorate.
Absolutely.
Because I'd learned the principles of writing essays and all that from teaching all these kids I did that for 4.5 years. So from 77 to 80, I ran the magazine and taught English and stayed real busy doing both. And the combined incomes of both of them were poverty scale. But I was single. Why not? I knew enough golfers that I could play golf for free all over town. I was hustling a little bit of golf, but nothing to speak of, because this is the capital for hustlers, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Billy Walters and on and
Billy
on.
Walters,
who I've
yes.
written a book about.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I look back on those years very fondly, because I love my time at UNLV despite the meager income. I made a lot of friends there, and being involved in UNLV is embraced by everybody who lives here.
Yes.
That's right.
People have been here a long time. Oh, you're at UNLV, you got to be a good guy, because the town's always rooted for the school to get better, the teams to win. We have our ups and downs, obviously, but being a UNLV instructor went a long way with people. And then I'm writing every single month. So I'm teaching and writing. And as Carol, who's sitting right here, my lovely wife, will tell you, those are the only things he's any good at. So you find out what you can do, and you stay with that.
Right.
Yeah.
How did we get past the Las Vegas Sun or the RJ?
Oh, well,
That would have been a natural, you would think, maybe.
I wrote columns for both.
Okay, got
Through
it.
the years, I've written for the Sun and the RJ as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, I suppose, honey. 4 or 5 years ago, I wrote 2 columns a month for the RJ. And my thing was, I just want to write about something that is tied to Las Vegas, but please don't have me cover a city council meeting or a school board meeting.
That would have been the
and I didn't want to be a political writer or education writer or sports writer. I wanted to be a story writer. And that's if I have a strength, it's telling stories and writing stories. And the subject matter covers every subject you can imagine. Wonderful people, serial killers, axe murderers. I mean, I've interviewed the good, the bad, and the ugly. And to me, my job every time is to do a good job of interviewing, just like you guys do, and to make sense of the story. What is interesting to a reader? Where's the beginning, the middle, of the end? Is there a moral to the story, or is it just interesting on its face? And the nice thing is, even though I'm now 72 years old, I've never grown tired of that. I still love doing that.
That's your passion.
That's my passion.
And you've written, I think I talked to your wife, 35 books?
Something like that. It's over 30.
And you know what we love about you, and you just expressed it, is that we're here to celebrate Las Vegas and its evolution. And you have gone out and interviewed and written autobiographies for some of the most iconic people here in the history of this town.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we're gonna talk.
I've been
about some
very
of those
fortunate
things.
in that respect.
I want, talk about this one right here.
Okay.
The Forgotten Man, Mr. Bennett.
Mr. Bennett.
Every people that we were talking about, you've interviewed him. And the writing was like this. You get sucked into this like you're in their house. I mean, you're in the story by the way you wrote this book. I felt like I knew him. I know the evolution of Mr. Bennett from being here to unfortunately how it ended.
Yeah.
But it is an incredible story writing ability.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
I guess if you're going to use one word for my style, it's conversational.
yes.
Yeah, and I've enjoyed reading Hunter Thompson, the great drug abuser who died like 10, 15 years ago. I have his books right by my bed, and I'll read those every now and then. He's a great stylist. I mean, he's another level of writing ability, but it is all about making the reader feel like they're in the room with you.
That's how you feel when this one, yes, definitely.
Yeah, and that one, what you find in this profession is one book often leads to another. And Diana Bennett, who's a big philanthropist and a huge UNLV supporter, I think she's on the foundation board now. Wonderful lady.
And Scott Minke too.
Poor Scott. Yep,
yes.
we lost him a year or two ago.
Right.
Diana called me after the book on Perry Thomas came out, which was called The Quiet Kingmaker of Las Vegas. And we can talk about him if you want later on. But,
absolutely.
But Diana called me and said, I'd like to meet you. I just read your book on Perry Thomas. He was a wonderful man. I thought it was really interesting, the style of it, kind of an oral history, interviewing all these people that knew him well and getting their thoughts right under their name in the book. And so I sat down with Diana and I said, I already know what the title of this book ought to be. And she said, what's that? The Forgotten Man. And she lit up and she said, that's perfect. Why'd you think of that? I said, because every time I read an article about the people who built Las Vegas, they tend to leave Bill Bennett's name off that list. They mention Mo Dalitz, Bugsy Siegel, Howard Hughes, Steve Wynn, Kirk Kerkorian. Those are obvious names. But Bill Bennett took over a broken down circus from the mob.
Jay Sarno team.
Yeah, from Jay Sarno and mob money, the Teamsters money, and turned it into the darling of Wall Street in 9 years, from 1974 to 1983.
And why do you think, not to stop you,
why
do you think he was so successful? I have my opinion that he went after the family market.
Yep.
He went after the piggy banks from 8 to 80 to the pension plans.
That's exactly right.
And he shifted this adult-oriented playground to more of a family-oriented playground.
No doubt about it. From the success of Caesar's Palace kind of got everybody thinking we need to do something like that. In the same way that the golf course Shadow Creek was built for $47 million, and all these guys who wanted to own their own golf course overdid it hugely after Shadow Creek. But Steve Wynn was playing with a different deck of cards with Shadow Creek.
Yes.
He could bring in people who would lose $1 million in a night at the gaming tables.
Yes.
You build a golf course out where the Paiute course is. How are you going to pay for that?
Yeah.
You can't get the return on the money. So there have been times, and Caesar's Palace was such a splash and so glamorous, and all the major headliners wanted to perform there, that a lot of other hotels thought, we want to be like Caesar's. And Bill Bennett, who was a furniture salesman in Phoenix, went bankrupt in that business before Del Webb gave him a job in gaming in Lake Tahoe and kind of got him into the gaming industry. Bill Bennett understood all these guys are aiming for the high rollers, but most of Americans are middle class or blue collar.
That's right.
And we want them too. So we're going to have penny slots, and we're going to have an arcade for the kids can play games, and we're going to have an elephant, on a trampoline or whatever above the casino. We're going to do crazy things. We're going to have an RV park. That's not a high roller deal. The RV park. He had slots of fun. Then later on, he and Bill Pennington, his partner, two war veterans who became best friends and then had a major split. Those two guys were on the same page. Nobody's going after middle America. We're going to go after Middle America big time. We're going to give away the rooms if necessary, just to fill the hotel. They're going to buy things in our gift shop, which are, low priced. They're going to eat at our buffet. They're going to play the nickel and dime and 25-cent slot machines like crazy. Their kids are welcome here, and they're not welcome anywhere else in town. And they were brilliant in doing that.
Yes, it was.
Because they didn't care about having, Adnan Khashoggi, the arms dealer from Iran. They didn't care about him renting the whole top floor and gambling in the casino. They wanted mom and pop.
And they got a lot of return business.
Oh.
Anytime back in those days, they would ask questions. Maybe the convention authority would say, they sent out these questionnaires. How many times do you come to Las Vegas? And people would say maybe 3 times. And they say, well, why wouldn't you come back from Southern California more than 3 times to Las Vegas? What am I going to do with my kids? And so he tapped right into that market where now he's getting all of this return business.
And you know where they just peppered the radio stations that covered from Southern Cal to Las Vegas. I forget the name of that station, but you get it on AM and FM on the way from Southern Cal to here. And you had Circus ads on there all day long.
All day long.
Come and stay in our rooms, $12 a night.
Yeah.
And
Mel Larson. That's what he did.
And I interviewed Mel a couple times for...
Mel was the gentleman that loved pink, didn't he?
Yes.
Everything was pink.
His car was pink.
Didn't he have a helicopter?
His helicopter was pink.
He was a pilot, yes.
And you know where Bill Bennett found him? Off of a speedway down in Phoenix. He ran drag races on weekends and the Phoenix Motor Speedway or something. And Mel was a promoter, an unbelievable promoter, gift of gab and very flashy. Think of Liberace kind of was.
This is...
Bill's wife recently contacted me and asked to suggest a writer. And there's a fella at UNLV now, and I contacted him, and he ended up doing that book. I was involved in a couple other projects. So there is a Mel Larson biography out there, but Mel was a major player in the building of the circus empire, no doubt about it.
Yes, he was, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's interesting having the background that you did when you interviewed Glenn Schaefer, a writer.
Yes, yeah.
How did that go?
Well, he was at a kind of a down part of his life because the Fountain Blue, which is starting to come back now, recent headlines, that had been his dream baby, and it tanked. And he got in some financial problems. So I can tell you that the timing of the interview with Glenn Schaefer was awkward for him.
Okay.
Because he was not riding high. I think he may live in New Zealand full time now.
I think he does, but he went to writing school. That was his educational background.
And he was. I think he might have gone to the University of Iowa
writing school.
Workshop.
Yes,
yeah, which is a big deal. Mm-hmm. That's like the Harvard for writers is the Iowa Workshop, and he had that bookstore in Luxor or Excalibur that he was very proud of. They had a lot of books for sale there that other places didn't have.
He transitions to be a finance.
And he
CFO
ends up making a ton of money in that business. I don't know how much he's hung on to, but he came across as a very bright guy at a dark time in his life when I interviewed him. I interviewed him one time for about an hour. And the thing that I explain to people when I occasionally talk to writers groups, I say that the ability to write well is one thing. That's 50% of the game. The other 50% is research and interviewing. And I know good writers who can really craft sentences and make beautiful paragraphs, but they're not good interviewers, or they're awkward, or they don't have enough conviction to ask the tough questions. And you live and learn. I had a couple people early in my life, well-known people, who I asked a hardball question of in the first 10 minutes of the interview. One of them walked away.
What? That was in.
It happened to be a great football player named Fred Biletnikoff, the Hall of Fame football player for the Raiders, our Raiders, right? Yeah. And I asked him some question about who he was dating or something. Stupid thing. I was just brand new as a sports writer, and his girlfriend was sitting on the grass, And I think she looked at me funny and looked at him funny and said, "We aren't talking about any of that stuff, his past dating habits."
Okay.
And I went back, I remember going back to the paper. My assignment that day was one of the very first ones they gave me. Go over to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Jim Plunkett and Fred Bolitnikoff are doing a football camp for high school kids. And I want you to interview both of them and get a profile on both of them. And I interviewed Plunkett first, and he was sensational.
Wonderful.
Former Heisman winner, great guy. Parents were blind. He had a great story. I mean, just gave me a really good interview and very pleasant. So I go over to Bolitnikoff. I guess I was probably feeling pretty good about myself. And I ask him about his dating habits, and he walks away. And I remember going back to the newspaper thinking, man,
How we gonna
how am I doing? 1 for 2. That may work in baseball, but not in writing. And they said, how'd it go? And I said, I had one really good story and I screwed up the other one. Okay, well, what'd you learn from that, Jack? If you have a hardball question and you have to ask it, save it for the very end of the interview, because by then you've got your story.
Yes, yes. Now, the people, if I were to, and I'm putting you on the spot here, if I were to ask you to give me one word to describe a lot of the people that you interviewed in Las Vegas,
I can do
what
that.
word would it be?
Which person?
No, just everyone. I'm thinking, this is just my opinion.
okay.
I'm thinking that Las Vegas had characters here that seemed to be a little different. And if I tell you, then I'll let that word
Okay.
out. But what is the word?
Okay, well, I'll give you 2 or 3.
Okay, that's fair.
Brave,
Yes,
courageous,
yes,
gutty.
yes.
Right.
I mean,
That's
these
Kirk Corey, Bill Bennett, right down the line. Yes.
guys who put all the money on the line, and Kerkorian is a perfect example. Steve, obviously, another example.
Yes.
These are guys who may not have had an ideal background to build a gaming empire. So you ask yourself, why did they do it? How were they able to do it? Well, they're all extremely bright.
Yes.
So when you talk about Steve Wynn, Kirk Kerkorian, Michael Milken, Bill Bennett, these are extremely bright people. But these are all people that didn't imagine themselves making their fortune on the Las Vegas Strip. Steve was running the family bingo parlor in New Jersey.
Yes.
Kirk Kerkorian was a volunteer pilot during the war, flying dangerous missions for the United States Army and Air Force over the North Pole and doing all sorts of stuff. He was a boxer. He was a pilot.
He was lefty. Yes.
He was a womanizer. He was all these things, but there was a huge intelligence behind Kirk, and he was fearless when it came to buying a movie studio, MGM, building the Las Vegas Hilton off the Las Vegas Strip. Everybody said, you got to be crazy. Why would you build the biggest hotel in the world on Paradise Road when all the activity is on the Strip? Well, how about if I have Barbra Streisand and Elvis Presley in my showroom?
Whoa.
That would do it.
Do you
That'll
think
bring
that-
him.
And he
That
did.
might bring a few.
Right.
And those were his 2 opening acts.
Yes, yes.
I was looking for words. Your words were perfect, but I was also looking for words like creative,
Well, no doubt.
innovative.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of those guys, and I want to mention some ladies, that
Sure.
that were, Elaine Wynn,
Of course.
Diana Bennett.
yes,
Diana
Bennett. It's
Claudine
funny.
Williams.
Claudine Williams.
Yeah.
It is really strange how a lot of us run sort of in the same circles. Diane Bennett, I was recruited by what's their HR?
Paragon. Oh,
their
Dennis Shipley.
Dennis Shipley recruited me to go and train people in Canada. When I say people, Native Americans, which they call Aboriginals, not Aborigines, Aboriginals up in Canada.
Yeah.
For Scott and
Yeah.
Diane.
Yes.
Paragon Gaming.
And I tell you something, a guy from Las Vegas going to Canada, it was a culture shock because I never felt that much cold, man. It was The cold was excruciating.
Yeah,
man.
no, it can get you.
Yeah.
But they did a great job though in Vancouver. The Paragon Corporation, led
Yes,
by
they did.
Diana. and Scott.
It's interesting, when we were doing the book, The Forgotten Man, of course, Bill Bennett died, I'm going to guess, in about 2002. So normally, I'm dealing with a living subject in a book. Here I'm dealing with a man that had died 7 years. I think we did that book in 2009 and 2010. After the Perry Thomas book. And so I'm relying on everybody else talking about Bill Bennett rather than Bill Bennett giving me the firsthand account. And you gain confidence from each one of these books that you do if the subject matter is at all remotely comfortable. Now, I've jumped out of my comfort zone a couple times. Fred Gibson, do you know that name? Remember the Pepcon explosion?
Yes.
When we thought somebody dropped a bomb on Las Vegas?
I was here when that happened.
I was in the.
I ran outside.
I was trying on pants at Neiman Marcus in the men's
You
department.
can feel it.
Yeah, I'd only buy on triple markdown because I wouldn't pay Neiman Marcus prices. Former teacher, right? But now I've lost my train of thought.
Pepcon, yes.
Oh, Pepcon. So Fred Gibson was a rocket scientist. That is what he did.
A true rocket scientist.
He has 27 patents on rocket fuel and all other things that NASA has used to put aircraft in space. And I met his granddaughter, and she said, "You ought to do a book on my grandfather. He's got some of your books in his office." So I meet Fred Gibson, and I think, man, I don't know if I'm qualified for this one. He's a rocket scientist. He's 87 years old with a kind of a failing memory. It's going to be a challenge. Turned out to be one of my favorite books. I love the guy. He was warm. He was still hitting on a lot of the Pistons, not all of them. I feel like I'm losing some every day.
Yeah.
You know, when you try to remember names and stuff. But Fred was an absolute prince. And we did the book, and it was painful for him, but he talked about the day that Pepcon blew to smithereens. And the most amazing thing about that accident is that 100 people weren't killed. There were only 2 people that died in that explosion. Yeah. And one of them was a guy who left the building at the first sign of fire and came back to save other people, and he got caught in the second explosion.
Which was the major one.
Which was the big one. And the other man was a man in a wheelchair that didn't have an easy exit out of the building. But only 2 lives were lost. But I told Fred when we first sat down, I said, you know, we're going to have to talk about the worst day of your life when the plant blew up. He goes, I know, and he kind of had a long face, and he said, but we'll do it. And I enlisted other people who'd worked at the company, and I imagine I got a great story out of him, and that book is called It Is Rocket Science.
That is. and you probably got to the reason or the cause of the explosion.
Yes.
At some point, I got to get the book.
Yeah,
that's a must.
Yeah, well, there's a dual cause. A fire broke out in one of the rooms, and they made ammonium perchlorate, which was something that was used in NASA and in the spacecraft and the space shuttle. That was their primary product, was ammonium perchlorate, and it was very flammable. And so that was one thing when the fire broke out. The other equally important cause, as determined by a court of law, was a leak in the gas line going into the building. And so Southwest Gas ended up paying a huge penalty for their role in that. But it was those 2 things combined that caused 6 different explosions. But the second one is the one that looked like somebody had dropped a bomb on Las Vegas.
You know, it's funny. We all know where we were that day. I know exactly where I was. And you're in Neiman Marcus.
Because it was a dressing room and it was kind of insulated. Yeah. And I came out and I didn't hear the explosion. I was trying on pants or something. I came out and everybody was buzzing, and I said, "What happened? Did you hear that?" Hear what? You were in the dressing room and it was closed off, and that's the first I heard about it.
I want to talk about one of your interviews, or actually more than an interview with Mr. Thomas, and the role we talk about forgotten men. He was really a a foundation for Steve Wynn, wasn't it?
Oh, totally.
Well,
How,
many of them.
can you? Well, I want to talk about Steve. Exactly. What did Mr.
Well,
Thomas?
I've told this to other people, and I will stand by it. If I had to name one person that was the most important person in the history of modern Las Vegas, it would be Perry Thomas.
Yes.
Perry Thomas negotiated all 6 hotel purchases for Howard Hughes.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to 1966 to 1970, the 4 years that Hughes was in the Desert Inn. That's huge.
That is
because
huge.
all 6 of the hotels that were acquired with Bob Mayhew's involvement, and we got to know Bob and went to dinner with him a lot. It was an amazingly neat guy. Talk about
He recruited me for the FBI.
Oh, did he?
This
He
is
Really?
a
did. He
story.
recruited me for the. But that.
Come
Listen, keep going.
How could you go undercover on anything?
Okay, since you.
Everybody's going to know
Tell the
Lonnie.
story.
That's Lonnie Wright.
I'm
That's
gonna-
no FBI agent.
I'm going to tell you the story. I was at Jim Rogers' home.
Okay.
We were orchestrating some alumni games, and he gets a phone call, and it's Robert Mayhew. And I'm listening to Jim say, Hey, I got somebody right here.
Oh, no kidding.
He was looking to recruit African Americans for the FBI.
Okay.
And so Jim says, "Come talk to," and I'm looking at Jim and I'm saying, he says, he basically told me in a nutshell, hey, would you like to come and do some weapon tests and this and that for the FBI? And
How old were you at the time?
I probably was about 27, 28.
Okay.
I wasn't 30 yet.
Okay.
And Jim was standing on the side saying, tell him yes. Tell him.
Yeah,
I said,
right.
Okay. I said, okay, I like to do it. But to make a long story short, I did the weapon test and I did pretty good. And it was getting to the point, I never was really into it, but I started learning more and I said, maybe this might be me. And then I was supposed to meet 2 FBI agents before I got shipped out to Washington, D.C. And so I go in, and when I walked to, into the entry area for the restaurant, I saw 2 guys stand up. So they knew who I was. And so I walk in, and one guy says, man, you're a big guy. and then the other guy say, yeah. We send the big guys through the door first.
That's it.
When he said that, I knew I was going to be an FBI
That's
agent.
funny. We send
And I
the
go,
big guys through the door.
That's
You
what he
get the
said.
first bullet.
Well, that's what he said, and right. And so we sat down and ate, and I was real quiet. They made my mind up before I shook their hands, man.
That's
I
too
said,
funny.
I am not going. But what was so funny, later on, I saw Robert Mayhew at an event that I was on the dais with Robert Mayhew and Jackie Gahn. And I was the junior flip on the
Yeah.
And one of my students that was the president of this casino club, he says, Dr. Wright, we want you to be on this dais. And he told me who was going to be on. Well, I knew Bob Mayhew. So when I got up to the mic, I think Bob forgot who I was. He probably deal with so many people.
Yeah.
So when I got up to the mic, I looked back. Here's the audience out here. I looked back and I said, Mr. Mayhew, you may have forgotten me, but you recruited me for the FBI. And he kind of smiled and looked at me. And then I think he recognized me. And then I said, but I decided not to do that because I forgot to tell you I have a bad back. And he looked at me all perplexed, and I said, yeah, I have a yellow streak. And
that's funny.
I told him the
That's
story, and then I said, I have a yellow streak, and then everybody cracked up. But anyway, let's go back.
So,
Let's go back.
So we'll go back to Perry.
Yes.
Because Bob and Perry worked very closely
Yes.
together during the Hughes years and beyond that, and they were very friendly. And Bob gave me 2 or 3 really good interviews for Perry. The funny part is, because I've been asked more than any other person, how did you get Perry Thomas to sit down and tell his life story?
Yes.
And like a lot of things in life, it was really pure luck. For 15 or 20 years, I was on the board at Opportunity Village, a great charity locally here, and it made a lot of friends on the board. And one of them was Tom Thomas, one of the 5 Thomas children. And Tom is just the super nicest guy, bright as can be. Always told him, I want you to run for governor. He would have been a great governor because he's, he just does. He does things for the right reasons.
Yes.
And Tom came up to me one day after an Opportunity Village meeting, and he said, how do these books work that you write? And I said, well, be more specific. And he goes, well, whenever the Thomas and Mack families get together, they were like one family joined together through Perry and Jerry Mack. My dad starts telling these amazing Las Vegas history stories, but he won't let any of us turn on a tape recorder, and we can't take a note. He just does it for entertainment because it's fun for him and we're all interested. And he goes, but he's now in his early 80s, and I've been talking to my brother Roger and Peter and Stephen. The whole family is super smart, super successful, all great people. And we all think Dad should get this in a book.
Absolutely.
And I thought of you, and I mentioned you to Steve Wynn, who I'd interviewed a bunch of times. And Steve said, yeah, Perry will like this guy. I think if he's going to do it, he might be the right guy. So Tom arranged a meeting at the bank building on Rancho, across from the Palace Station, whatever it's called now. They've changed the name a few times. He's in that bank building, and I walk in, and there's Perry and Peggy Thomas. This would have been 2002 or 3. And I'd written about 15 or 18 books by then, and I think a couple of them might have been on the table. And Perry, class act, stands up, beautiful blue eyes, even in his 80s. He was charming and handsome. Stood up and said, Jack, it's great to meet you again. And I'll never forget why he said that. He said that to put me at ease. I had never met him. I would not have forgotten meeting Perry Thomas because I'd heard about him and read about him for all the 20-some years I've been in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. But he said that just to make me comfortable. And it's a great tip. Mm-hmm. Great to see you again, even though he didn't know me from Adam. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, thank you, Mr. Thomas. And I didn't tell him we'd never met. I said, it's a pleasure. And I sat down, and he goes, well, now that we've met, let me say this. I think this is a horrible idea.
Oh, God, what a start.
Yeah, so now do I pack up my briefcase and get out of here? And I kind of played dumb, and I said, well, what's a horrible idea? And he said, the idea that I would flap my gums about all these amazing people I worked with through the years, many of whom were quite notorious, as I'm sure you know. and why would I tell stories about these people? And Tom, throwing me a rope, knows I'm scrambling a little bit. Tom goes, Dad, they're all dead. Thank you.
Good.
I wouldn't have thought of that. And Perry goes, well, that could be, but they have kids and grandkids. And I said, Mr. Thomas, let me explain how we envision this to work. Tom and I have discussed this. I know Steve Wynn has talked to you. This is what's going to be called an authorized biography. And what that means is you get to read every word before we get it published. Mm-hmm. However, I'm not here to do a public relations job on your life. Even though 95% of the things you did were heroic and triumphant, I also want to talk about some of the down moments, the disappointments, the failures. It's not a real book if it doesn't have hills and valleys. Mm-hmm. And I remember him sitting back, kind of shrunk, and he said, tell me more. So that started the conversation. Okay, and he said, and I had a notepad there because I didn't know, maybe I'm going to get some stuff here today. And he said, so like, what would you ask me? Well, like any first interview with a book prospect, I've done homework before I go in there. And so I asked him 3 or 4 questions, probably about Hughes and how he met Steve and Elaine and, whatever it was, how Valley Bank almost folded up a year after he got here. I knew enough to act smart and ask some good questions. And we talked for about 2 to 3 hours in what was supposed to be just an ice-breaking introduction. And at the end, he goes, Jack, I rather enjoyed this. When can we meet again?
Oh. Home run.
And that was it. Now all of a sudden, the fish is not only on the hook, I got him in the boat. And that turned into 2 years of fascinating interviews. We took the whole family. Carol and I took our kids to Del Mar, where his world-famous horse Brentina was performing. And Lily my daughter was about 8 or 9, and she got to pet the horse and had her girlfriend with her. And that, so I mean, everything about it was great. I flew up to Sun Valley, where he had his home. In fact, he was spending half the year in Idaho and half the year in Las Vegas at the time. They were both in their early 80s. Peggy is still living, I believe. She's got to be 97, 98. Perry we lost about 5 or 6 years ago. But when I was in Idaho with him, I would sit with him in the morning and drink coffee and watch his dressage horses perform, practice for the Olympics and the World Championships. And he had these terrific young women riders, equestriennes, who were riding these horses and training. And I mean, it was one of the funnest things I've ever done. I'd just sit there with Perry Thomas, and he'd talk about Jimmy Hoffa and Anthony Spilatro and, Jimmy Fradiani, Jimmy the Weasel. We knew them all. He did business with them all.
Through the bank.
Not directly through the Teamsters, but the deal was, and this is why he is, in my opinion, the most valuable person ever. There were only 2 other banks in town. One was Nevada State Bank, and the other was the predecessor of FNB, or FIB, First Interstate. And in their charter, they both had headquarters in San Francisco. In their charter, they said, we will not loan money to gambling operations. So there's 3 banks in town: the Bank of Las Vegas, which became Valley Bank, and the other 2 banks who won't loan to gamblers. And he's got Benny Binion looking for money. He's got, I'm spacing the guy's name at the Sahara, Milton Prell was his name. Milton Prell. He's got Bill Bennett. He's got the MGM guys, Kerkorian. All these people need money to build or expand, build a new hotel or expand their current ones. Perry was the only way to get the money. And so he was able to charge pretty hefty interest rates. But if they believed in their project, if Benny Binion believed that his idea was worth borrowing $3 million and he had to pay 11% interest, Perry Thomas was the only guy in town. Perry didn't care what your criminal record was. He didn't care what your reputation was.
He believed in their projects, though.
He believed in the projects, and a lot of
He also cared about getting paid back.
Well, damn right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how he became a billionaire.
Yes.
He made sure the deals were good for him, but I don't think he would have given a loan to a sure loser. He had too much integrity for that. But it was like a crash course in Las Vegas history from the man himself. And so I was never nervous interviewing Perry, but I knew if I could do that book, and he was pleased with it, which he was, because I stayed in touch with him and interviewed him on Bennett's book. I interviewed him on several other projects. I'd call him in Sun Valley and would talk just like it was yesterday.
You and I talked about how he had a real impact on Steve Wynn. Steve could have left Las Vegas early on if it wasn't
within a year.
Yeah.
He was brought here from New Jersey to be the assistant slot manager at the Frontier Hotel, which I think was called the Last Frontier then. It was a new hotel, but had a great location on the Strip where the Frontier grew up all those years later. It's been blowing up so many times. I don't even know. Is that where Resorts World is now? It might be where Resorts World is now. I think it is.
Some of that problem.
But Steve had a position that allowed him a point or two in the ownership of the hotel. They saw, as everybody who's met Steve did, he's the brightest guy around. He can talk to you about anything. And his vision was much better, obviously, then, but he had early stage retinitis pigmentosa even back then. And Perry Thomas met him early on. And here's a Mormon and a Jew. And Perry's joke through the years was, I do business with the Mormons in the morning and the Jews at night. and the point was, he would do business with any business person that had a good idea, that was willing to risk a lot to get it. So anyway, they did a lot of wiretaps on the guys at the Frontier. And several of them were really connected to organized crime. And on one of the wiretaps, and Elaine Wynn told me this, and it might even be in Perry's book, Elaine Wynn said, had it not been for one wiretap, Steve and I would have left Las Vegas in 1969 and never come back. And on the wiretap, somebody goes, well, how about this guy? Oh, yeah, he's one of us. How about this guy? Oh, yeah, he's one of our founding partners. And then somewhere on the wiretap, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, somebody says, how about that Wynn kid from New Jersey? And somebody wired said, he's so green they ought to grow cucumbers out of his ears. Or
And that saved him.
Something, and that saved him.
That saved him.
When they looked at who they're going to bust, he lost his job because all of his bosses were taken out, but it didn't ruin his reputation. And so Steve at that point, and Peggy had socialized with Steve and Elaine. They got to know them well. Perry realized we need guys that are that smart to stick around. So he actually sent Steve and Elaine up to Sun Valley. He said, you stay up there and you can ski at Sun Valley Resort, which is one of the great ski places in the country, and I'll find something for you. And the business he found for Steve in like 1970 was the liquor business that ended up being sold to Larry Ruvo. And they bought it from Meshulam Rickless, who married Pia Zadora, and at one time owned the Riviera Hotel. And Shenley was the big liquor that he distributed. And Steve ran that for 2 or 3 years, but as Steve told me many times, it wasn't fast enough. I needed more action than that. And so he gradually gets on the board at the Golden Nugget as a guy probably 32 or 3 years old. He's on the board at the Golden Nugget, which is really an old school saloon.
And it had sawdust at one time.
Oh man, it was not a carpet joint. It was a peanut joint. Peanut shells and sawdust on the floor. And Steve started doing his own investigating, and he found out the dealers were stealing money, the valet parkers were stealing money, the bartenders were stealing money, and he compiled all this information. He did his own little investigation, probably had some guys working for him, and he went to the board one day and he said, you guys are running a corrupt operation here. You're never going to make money. The guy's name was Bucky something that was the president of the hotel. Within a week or so, Bucky was replaced. Steve Wynn became either the chairman of the board or the vice chairman of the board, and Perry, coaching him all the way, shows him how to buy more stock, how to gain more control, and he ends up being the principal.
How did he get involved with Michael Milken?
Michael Milken.
I think their faith.
Yes.
They're both brilliant Jewish guys. I think they both went to Wharton Business School. Yes. Steve went to Penn. I can't remember where Mike went undergrad, but they went to Wharton. And Mike Milken had a way of figuring out who the bright guys were in every city, because he's working for Drexel Burnham Lambert. And he's if you ask me the smartest guy I've ever met, he's it. Top 2 or 3. Sorry to insult the rest of you, but Mike Milken is off the charts.
That's incredible.
And even though he got in trouble and spent a little minimum security time in prison, he was great to me. He tried to help me with a screenplay I'd written. And here's a quick Mike Milken. Here's how bright this guy was. So his PR firm, Robinson, Lake, Lear, and Montgomery out of New York. I can't remember my home address, but I remember the name of that PR firm. Go figure that. Yes. Robinson, Lake, Lear, and Montgomery. Really neat people out of New York. They were big time. They were at the center of Barbarians at the Gate and some of these big investment bank stories that became movies. They were right in the middle of that. And Ken Lear was the guy who called me up one day and said, Steve Wynn said that you'd be the right guy to work with Mike and to do publicity on his foundation. The Milken Foundation, you probably bumped into them. They give money to teachers across the country, $25,000 or $50,000 grants to grade school teachers, principals, junior high teachers, and they pick out somebody who's totally devoted to education and needs the money, and they give them the money and it's tax-free. So I said, and they paid me a really good amount of money to do this. This was clearly a PR job, which is something I hardly ever do. I never do that, but I wanted to do it to be close to Milken because I had already liked him a lot and knew that it could lead to other opportunities. And so we're in Chicago. I went back on his plane. We're in Chicago, and I got to keep in mind the time frame. Rudy Giuliani is the chief law enforcement officer for the Southern District of New York, which goes after Wall Street and all the guys. This was Rudy before the current Rudy.
Yes.
We won't talk about
No,
the
we
current
won't.
Rudy.
No.
No.
Let's
This
talk
was,
about the-
It was this Rudy who was great during 9/11 and all that. So Milken is in the crosshairs of the Southern District of New York. They are going to put his butt in jail one way or another. And all the heat's on him. He's on the cover of Wall Street as the king of greed. The Michael Douglas character in the movie Wall
Yes.
Street was
Based on-
based
All that-
on Mike Milken.
Yes.
Okay, so he needs all the publicity.
Greed is good.
Yeah, greed is good. Thank you. He needs all the positive ink he can get. And Brian Greenspun said, I want you to do a 7-part series on Milken on the front page of the Sun, which I did every day, Monday through Sunday. I didn't get paid much, but I got a great spread. And so I was able to use Meeting Milken to do that. But we're at this teacher foundation giving luncheon in Chicago. And I'm at a table with a Hispanic gentleman who has 8 or 9 kids. And he's a grade school principal. How do you support your family on that? And he's about to get a check for 50 grand or something tax-free,
Wonderful.
which is more than he makes in 2 years. I mean, it just, and really pleasant guy, and his wife's there, and the kids are there. And Milken comes up to the table, and he goes, well, Mike says, Jack, I'm glad we sat you at this table because our guest of honor today is Mr. Lopez, whatever his name is, and he's a wonderful guy, and here's his story. And he has 9 children,
Wow.
and here are their names
He knew them all.
off the top of his head.
Knew them all.
He's got Javier, and he's
Right
got
down the line.
right down the line. He named,
Photographic memory.
I mean, telling you, but who goes to the trouble of doing that? He's giving the guy 50,000, but he also memorizes the name of all of his kids. And I thought, here's a guy in the crosshairs of the federal government who might be going to prison, who's giving all this money to these wonderful people who deserve it, and he takes the time to memorize the name
and
of all the
wasn't
kids.
distracted by his own problems.
Oh, I
To-
mean,
to- that- that's-
Milken's he's the best. I'm
you,
a big
you
fan.
know, it is absolutely amazing how people like Milken, Steve Wynn have done a lot of good. Then all of a sudden, people want you to forget all the good that they've done. And I shared this with you that Steve Wynn and Bobby Baldwin called me up at the college and asked me to recruit. Remember this story?
150 dealers, African American dealers, to open the Bellagio. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And-
we're living in an era where you got to watch every word you say,
Everything.
every email you send, every
Yes.
text. I mean, and I'm not exonerating John Gruden at all. He sent some really stupid stuff.
Yes.
10 years ago, when he was not employed by the Raiders, to somebody at another organization, and somebody dug those out and basically ruined any chance for him to coach, be a broadcaster ever again.
Done. Yes,
Nobody's
done.
going to hire him. He's 56, 7 years old. He is done. Now, he's got plenty of money. You don't have to feel sorry for John Gruden. But holy smoke, if somebody dug up every email I've ever written, I wouldn't feel too comfortable about it.
I tell all my students that,
I
I tell all my students, and Dr. Peacock can attest to this, that we're training a bank of talent, middle managers to upper managers, when they take our courses, articulate onto UNLV. They're going to end up being leaders of people. And I tell them, when you write an email or you write anything down, don't do it while you're emotional, because it could come back to
There you
haunt
go. That's good
It
advice.
could come back to haunt you.
Definitely. I've hit send, and I sent it to the wrong person. That is an email.
That can burn you.
You can burn on that. You know what? Go ahead.
I just wanted to go back to Steve. Steve wanted his new hotel to reflect the community. He saw that for whatever reason, his middle managers were not hiring African Americans.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe they brought their own biases and prejudices into a multicultural workplace. Whatever reason, he saw his numbers down. And that's how that program got started. He wanted to reflect, he had enough Latinos, he had enough whites, but not enough blacks. And he did that, and he kept his word. I'm going to tell you something that's amazing about Steve. When 911 hit, last ones hired, first ones fired. So they had to let go a lot of my kids. And I called Bobby and I called, I forget the other gentleman that was a part of the program.
Artie Nathan, no.
No, it wasn't Artie. He was on the casino side. I called him up and I said, hey, what's happening with my kids? You know, why, you know, he told me, I talked to Steve. He's going to bring them all back when
The economy recovers.
the economy recovers. Guess what? He brought them all back.
Oh, neat.
He brought them all back. And all I could do is go by. I can't think of the gentleman's name, but he got the word from Steve, and so I had to tell the kids. I said, "Listen, you're gonna go back. Wait till the economy gets better." And when he did that, man, I just thought the world of Steve Wynn and what he had done. Historically, for the first time in the state of Nevada, that many African Americans were hired to make disposable income.
That had never happened before.
Never happened before, and I don't think it'll ever happen again. 150, making $65,000 or more a year, that changes the trajectory of their families.
Oh, you bet.
Everything, and Steve just did it like it was nothing. But he wanted to do the right thing. And then when people like Steve that have done a ton of good for people, he gets caught in something, and then all of a sudden people want to pile on and forget all the good stuff he's done, even some of the people that he done good stuff for.
Well, even when he was asked back to light the torch at the Golden Knights game a couple of weeks ago, he was thrilled by that, and a lot of people wrote angry letters to the newspaper that how did you let him come back and do something honorary like that? So
maybe because they knew all the good stuff he had done.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's certain things you just can't do.
Yeah. Yes,
and
that was one.
And there's certainly something to be learned from the screw ups that we've been watching. In the last several months.
Yeah,
yes.
You're talking about what Steve did by hiring those people. Steve knew the history of this town.
Yes.
And how segregated this town.
Sure.
Absolutely.
When I was at the Sahara, you could go into the showroom and it was all white male in story, nobody else. All the valet, the same thing.
Yeah.
So those were the jobs. He knew that history, and would you said all those qualities, those attributes. That's like one of them. He could see ahead and was ahead of everybody else.
I will say this. I've never interviewed anybody that's been more interesting than Steve Wynn. And I've interviewed him, I'll be conservative, and I'll say a dozen times. And these were always long interviews because once you got him to sit down, he can talk as much as I can, much as you guys. I mean, he can go. Yes. And the thing that blew me away is he can talk about a number of subjects brilliantly: modern art, literature, not just gaming. A lot of gaming guys, they can talk your ear off about gaming. Steve could talk about anything. He was so well read. I interviewed him as I walk into his library in this beautiful home at Shadow Creek, right on the 18th fairway. It's pertinent with the rough of the 18th hole leading right up to the French doors that open up to the golf course, and pine needles and stuff all over in the rough that he'd imported from North Carolina, of course. and so he says, Jackie says, there's two calls that may come through while we talk today, and I never take calls during an interview, but these are both important calls. So if one or both come through, you'll excuse me. I said, Steve, of course. And he goes, well, aren't you going to ask me who they are? I said, well, I didn't think of it, but if you want to tell me. Well, David Rockefeller from the World Bank.
Okay.
Nelson Rockefeller's brother.
Yes.
And the Dalai Lama.
Oh, for God's sake, what two opposite ends of this?
The Dalai Lama. And then he goes into a Dalai Lama impersonation.
He was into Buddhism.
Which I can't do, but it's a very clipped speech. And if you Google the Dalai Lama, Steve nailed it. He said the Dalai Lama. And he was saying it to impress me, and I was impressed.
Of course,
Rockefeller and the Dalai Lama are calling you today. We can take a break. And sure enough, and of course, I'm thinking of the movie Caddyshack.
Oh, God.
And in the movie Caddyshack, Bill Murray is a caddy who once looped for the llama. He once caddied for the llama. And it's a funny scene. If you
I've seen the movie. I'll have to look at that.
Just type in Bill Murray Dalai Lama or
Yes.
Caddyshack Dalai Lama. So Bill Murray is standing in the Caddyshack. He's telling the other caddies, he's playing big shot. He's going, "Yeah, you guys make a lot of money here, but I once looped for the llama." And they go, "What?" "Yeah, I looped for the Dalai Lama." "Well, what did he pay you?" "Well, he didn't pay me anything, but he did offer me eternal peace." So he said, "So I got that going for me."
That's in the flick.
Yeah,
That's a must.
I may have botched the
No,
line,
no,
but
that's good.
he offered eternal consciousness or something.
I
And if
love
you
it.
watch, and he does it, with his left
Yeah.
way down playing Carl the Greenskeeper. So anyway, half hour, 45 minutes into the thing, the Dalai Lama calls. And he puts it on speaker for my benefit, obviously, and it was hilarious.
At some point.
You know what? You know how I'd get I interviewed the King of Jordan with more bodyguards around him than Saddam Hussein had.
Okay.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I had to go through like 4 levels of screening. My feeling is this: if you've prepared yourself properly for the
You're ready.
interview, you're just talking to another human being.
That's right.
And you can impress them with how prepared you are for the interview. The only interview I'd ever be nervous for is one I wasn't prepared to do. And I won't ever do that. So
Okay, I've got
We
one.
prepared for you, but we're still nervous.
I
yeah, I'm
got
pretty
one, though.
intimidating.
I have to. This is the killer, Jimmy Chagra.
Oh my gosh.
For God's sake.
How long you got?
We have enough time.
What did you know about him? Let me ask you that.
Well, I read Oscar's book, so I know that story.
Okay.
And I know that Jimmy Chagra called Tony Spilotro a midget.
Yep,
And then
that is
Oscar brought
true.
them together. But more importantly, you got the interview with this guy. And Mace, how did you find him? Hook up. And what are we doing with Netflix? This has got to be a Netflix.
Well, from your words to Hollywood's ear, again, it's a little hard work and a lot of good luck. And my luck in Hollywood has been as bad as my luck in books has been good. Let me just say that. So we spent a lot of time and trouble and effort to film 3 full pilot episodes. We spent $500,000 of investor money to make those. This was at the time that the only thing on TV was the Kardashians and Ryan Seacrest. So we were too serious for them. Carol and I went over to LA. We had meetings. Nobody seemed to get what we had done, and we still think it's a great idea if we live long enough. But anyway, on that track, I was in charge of an episode on the biggest money golf games ever played in the world, which were played in Las Vegas by all the poker players, the Bobby Baldwin, Doyle Brunson, Puggy Pearson, Billy Walters, all those guys. And as we interviewed these guys on camera, this is for the TV pilot we're going to do, which was called at the time True Vegas. Mm-hmm. And it's still a great idea if we ever get the opportunity. Yeah, I mean, we were digging up all these great stories. And what I kept hearing from all these gamblers was the guy that everybody wanted to play golf with in Vegas was Jimmy Chagra because he had X million dollars and he was laundering money anyway. And he didn't care if he lost $500,000 on a golf course. He'd just pay in cash and move on because he got $10 million off the last ship that landed in the Boston Harbor for the weed that he brought from Colombia or Mexico. And so, like anybody who's lived here a long time, I had heard a million stories about Chagra. And I'm thinking, we've interviewed all the gamblers here. I got to get Chagra on camera, or at least an audio tape. And so I called Oscar, who I've known for a long time, and he's always been very great to me and very cooperative. He goes, "Did you know that Jimmy's out of prison?" I said, "You got to be kidding me. He was sentenced to life without parole, and I assumed he's going to die in prison." He goes, "No, he's out of prison, and I don't know where he is, but Dave Chesnov does." And so, former partner and representing all the famous cases, including Henry Ruggs recently. So I called David and I said, "David, I'm working on this story. Do you happen to know where Chagra is?" He goes, "He's in Arizona. He's in Mesa, Arizona, living in the Federal Witness Protection Program under an assumed name." but I know his attorney. I know of his attorney. She's a woman in El Paso. And I can give you her number, and you can call her and see if there's any chance you can get just a taped voice interview, audio interview with Shagra. So I won't tell you the whole story, but I worked through the channels and I got the interview on the phone. And when I got him on the line, there were 3 attorneys in El Paso on the conference call, and they're all screening because the woman attorney had told me, you can't talk to him about any of his criminal convictions, or you can talk to him about golf. That was the ground rules that she laid for me. I said, okay, I'll take it, because this episode I'm doing is about golf gambling, to find out, did you really lose $1 million in one day or $500,000 and all that. So I get him on the phone, and my strategy for once worked. And I thought, I'll bet these attorneys are not golfers, and I'm going to bore them to death so they hang up and I can get Jimmy one-on-one. And it was a Saturday morning, and that's exactly what happened. We had 5 people on the call initially. I started talking about Lee Trevino, Billy Walters, gambling in Vegas, the Dunes, the Desert Inn, Las Vegas Country Club, blah, blah, blah. Over the course of several minutes, click, click, click. And I finally go, Elizabeth, are you still there? William, are you still there? George, are you still there? No. I said, oh, Jimmy, I guess it's just you and me. And he was easy to talk to. Laughed a lot. His voice sounded like right out of The Sopranos. And he was just a thoroughly enjoying interview. And I said, man, I'd sure like to interview you about a bunch of stuff, and I'd like to bring a film crew down there and interview you in Mesa. He goes, you got to pay me. I go, well, we're not really paying for interviews. Like, what are you looking at? $5,000.
Easy.
I said, I can't do that. No way I can do that. I've just been joined by my wife of 26 years, Carol Sheehan, mother of our 2 kids. And a funny note about us is she's from Lakeland, Florida. I'm from Spokane, Washington, and nobody in her family has ever directly met anybody from my family.
Are you serious?
No,
we like it that way.
I think it's kind of a good thing.
Yeah, sometimes it can.
But anyway, everybody gets along. They've just never met.
Yeah.
So we're talking about meeting Shagra in Arizona. Yeah. And we agree on a fee. I think the initial fee was $1,500, but we actually paid him more for further cooperation. And I had only seen pictures of him before he went to prison. So when we got there, and we have a film crew, 5 people, I said, honey, he's supposed to arrive in like 5 minutes. Go out in the parking lot and see if a guy that looks like it'd be Jimmy Shagra is there. Take it from there.
So certainly, I'm out in the parking lot, and I see this run down, big, huge, like Lincoln Continental with like missing hubcaps, and he's got something in the middle of where he's sitting, and the car comes around the corner, and I mean, in a cartoon, it would have been, smoke would have been coming out of the tailpipe. Yeah. And he comes around, and he parks the car, and he gets out, and I said, this has got to be him. So I'm like, is Jimmy? I'm Carol. I'm Jack's wife.
What is he carrying?
And so he, on his right hand, he's got this huge trophy. It's this trophy that was probably as tall as he was. And so he said, well, yeah, come on in, we'll do the interview. And I wanted to bring my Caesar's Palace trophy that they gave me, that all the dealers gave me when I was there. He said, I thought they would be interested in that. So I said, okay, of course, come on in. And he came in, and Jack will tell you how he interviewed him, what happened then.
And if you type my name and Jimmy Shagra, Google it, there's all sorts of pictures, and there's sizzle reels and stuff. So anyway, he came out and he set this enormous trophy, bigger than you'd get to win the U.S. Open golf or tennis tournament. He sets it on a table right next to us. I look at it, and it's got all these names. It's a sterling silver trophy, expensive, and it has all these names inscribed on it, like 50 names. And the inscription, which of course we took pictures of and everything, it said to Jamil Jimmy Shagra, the most generous gambler ever to come through Las Vegas. Thank you for your generosity, your good humor, your kindness. We wish you all the best from the crap dealers at Caesar's
Oh,
Palace.
they got
Can you
rich off-
imagine that?
They got rich off of him.
Yeah,
They got rich off of him.
yeah.
Legendary.
I interviewed a lot
At
of them.
one time, I worked at Caesars as a dealer, so I know that they got rich
Yeah,
off of him.
they did.
And at that time, you only split it 4 ways with the crew.
That's
that's right.
exactly right.
Yeah. Yes.
Just last week, in fact, as recently as a week ago, there was an obituary from a wonderful guy named Wendell Broussard, who was a crap dealer at Caesars. And we in all the 50 hours of interviews I've done for hopefully this 7-part documentary we're working on.
Amazing.
I got a few dealers from Caesars and other executives from the hotel, because Shagra's life story is about more than just selling pot. It's about being the biggest gambler on the Strip, the biggest golfing gambler in town. Of course, the murder of the federal judge.
Yes.
With the trigger man being Woody Harrelson's father.
Incredible.
His criminal defense attorney, the future mayor of Las Vegas. I mean, the story goes on and on and on. And the judge that replaced Judge Wood after he was assassinated became a candidate for the Supreme Court, William Sessions. He became famous in his own right. I mean, there's so many tentacles to the story that we spent a year, 18 months
Oh gosh, yeah.
until he
Probably more than
died.
that.
We met him in June of 2006. That was the interview that we did on the patio. And then he died in July of 2008. And I was either the first, second, or third person his wife called from his deathbed to tell me that Jimmy was gone. When you work that closely with somebody and they've shared every aspect of their life with you, you get pretty close.
So it was around Christmas time, and we rented him a house. I found a house for him in Summerlin, him and his wife and his dog Paco.
Yeah.
And so we found a house, and I went over and put a Christmas tree up and decorated it, made it feel a little homey for them. And they stayed here for
a month.
a little over a month, and we did interviews there. We set up cameras, and we had a film crew. George Knapp and his film crew came over and did some filming there. And basically, Jack went over every single day and would interview him for hour upon hour. And so we had all this footage that just stacked up. And so when we were done with it, we edited a lot of it, used a lot of it in our True Vegas television show that we were putting together. And then we still have a lot of it that's going into this new documentary, the docudrama that Jack is doing right now. Yeah, and so that docudrama is just story after story after story about Jimmy Shagra and the things he went through, oh my gosh, just in any one story could make a movie.
Well, the opening scene in the first episode is Jimmy doing the first solo flight of drugs to Mexico. He was trained by an Army buddy of his who was a heroic Vietnam pilot named Pete Kraszewski, and Pete was medals all over from his heroic combat missions in Vietnam, and he came back and couldn't get a job as a Vietnam veteran. We've heard that story before.
A lot of times.
And he had it in his mind, this really charismatic guy that I met in basic training is bilingual, speaks perfect Spanish, and I can't get a job after what I've done for this country. I know what Jimmy and I are going to do. We're going to sell drugs. We're going to sell marijuana. And so Pete went all the way from Aspen, Colorado, where he had met all these rich kids who wanted to pay $100 a pound for marijuana in 1969, 1970. And he talked Jimmy into quitting the family carpet store job where he was selling toilet seats and bath mats for Shagra's rugs. A floor without a rug is like a kiss without a hug.
I'll have to remember
You
that.
know the commercial.
Is that classic? That was on the store. The building still exists in El Paso. We have footage of it. It's something else now. But Jimmy goes down to Mexico and South America, and he's looking for great weed growers, great marijuana growers. And he finds these two brothers that had recently completed medical school together. I mean, think about this. They take him out to their barn, and as Jimmy said to me many times on camera, they opened the doors of that barn, I got stoned.
Right.
The smell of this weed, and he said, I knew this was the best stuff possible. And he said, so I told Pete, I said, we got to rent a plane. We got to take the seats out of the plane. We got to load it up with as much weed as we can. We'll fly it to all these trust fund hippies that you know in Aspen, Colorado. They paid $3 a pound for it, sold it for $100 a pound. Two guys in their early 20s made $85,000 on their first mission. And as Jimmy said many times, that's the day a drug dealer was born. And the rest is history. 4 freighter ships, 6 airplanes later. But the first scene of the first episode is Jimmy doing his first solo flight, and he loses an engine and goes right into the Sea of Cortez. So he's in the Sea of Cortez in a busted up plane, thinking this is the end of my life. Sharks are circling. And you know what saved his life? This goes back to Moby Dick. At the end of Moby Dick, Ishmael is saved because Queequeg's coffin is floating in the ocean. After the whale has destroyed the Pequod and everybody on it, he's alive, and there's Queequeg's coffin that he had helped the Indian harpooner make. So this went right back to my literature background, and Jimmy stayed alive floating on a plastic-wrapped bale of marijuana till his crew realized he didn't make the flight. He's in the Sea of Cortez. They went out. He was on that bale of weed for 9 hours. So the very thing that really kind of ruined his life at that point saved his life. You love those ironic events like that as a writer. And every time I'd sit with him, he'd tell me something else that just blew my mind. His older brother was a nationally famous drug defense lawyer, Lee Chagra, who was murdered in his office, and that unraveled the whole empire of drugs because the DEA and the FBI went in and yellow taped the murder scene where his brother was killed, and they got all the information to nail Jimmy.
This has got to be a Netflix or something.
No doubt.
I thought Netflix got that, but it could be any one of them.
You know, basically we're going to shoot the pilot this spring. COVID hurt us badly, as it did everybody. Cost us 2 years. My filming partners are finishing up The Walking Dead. She's a director and he's a producer on The Walking Dead, and we've formed a partnership with them. Carol and I have, and we hope to shoot the pilot in the spring and then either offer it up for sale or if other investors came on board, would shoot the other 6 episodes ourselves. But we've scripted 7 45-minute episodes for a 7-part series. And if somebody doesn't buy this, they're nuts.
Yeah, well,
this is the best crime story I've ever heard.
it is. No, beyond anything. We got a guy who films right here. If you're looking for a filmer.
Well, we'll keep you in mind.
We have talked about a lot of iconic people in the past.
Yeah.
Have you run across any contemporary people that can hold a candle to some of the people that we've named doing this podcast?
Well,
that contemporary.
There's Tim and Tom, but
the two
that was
guys,
a while ago.
Tim Breitling and Tim Poster, who bought the Golden Nugget from Steve Wynn, had a TV show for a year. They're really bright young guys. I like both of them a lot. Jim Murren has worked with us on a couple projects. He's now left Las Vegas, involved in some big business deals. But Jim did a lot of good things when he was at MGM. He had to oversee all the repercussions from the Mandalay Bay shooting on 1 October. I think time will tell if there are any.
How about William Hornbuckle?
Oh, Bill's a really good guy, UNLV graduate.
Yes.
I like Bill a lot, and he's taken on that mantle, I think done really well. But, time will tell. These guys were all revolutionaries, and they were kind of iconoclasts, and they were against the grain. So many of the executives in the hotel today are trained through hospitality at UNLV or business schools. Some of them come from the East Coast, and they're pretty straight arrows.
Yes.
They're not the renegades that the Benny Binions and the Kerkorians.
They're bureaucrats as well.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
We got a guy that could be on that list. Mr. Jackie Robinson is building
I love
Nets
Jackie.
Resort. You know Jackie.
I do.
And you know what he's doing on that property between the Sahara.
I hope he brings it to fulfillment.
This
I
would
know
be a story. This would be a story.
he's fought a battle, but I've known Jackie since he lost that 1 year
Yes.
when they went to the Final Four and had the knee injury, and then I covered him when he played for the Las Vegas Dealers. I love Jackie. He's a great guy.
This is his roommate.
I was his roommate.
Oh, no kidding.
Tark put seniors and freshmen together, and Jackie was my roommate.
Oh my God.
Yeah, Jackie is an amazing.
Well, you know Lauren Jacobs then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lauren's a friend of ours.
Lauren Jacobs is the doctor of almost all the former rebels.
Yeah.
You know, they call us former running rebels, and I said, no, we're walking rebels now. Some days we're crawling rebels.
No kidding.
The community that we have here in Las Vegas.
Yeah, yeah.
It's so connected with people that are in the gaming business, people like yourself. When people talk about Vegas, they really don't know this town.
Mm-hmm.
They really don't know this town.
How
That's
small,
what
how
Dr.
small
P-
it is.
Yeah, how small it is, and how people care about each other, how people trust each other, and how people are loyal to each other. What would you say after interviewing all the people you've lived here, you and your wife? Did you raise your kids here?
Yes, they were both born here. One at Sunrise and one at Summerlin Hospital.
What high schools did they go to?
They went to Las Vegas Day School and Bishop Gorman.
Okay.
And well, I won't say
No.
anymore.
About Bishop Gorman?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I went to private school. I went to Our Lady of Las Vegas.
Sure.
I was an altar boy. Econ Spiritu
So was I.
Doremus Nominus Patus et
Adem
Finitus.
quili tifica juventutum mea.
Oh, well, you better than I am.
I've been
Male
there,
Copa, male Maxima Copa.
Two altar boys here.
We were two altar
And
boys.
you know the sad thing is we're still both going to hell.
Yeah, that's not going to do you any good.
You
We got a response out of your
I don't want to go there. Hey, you know something? Speaking of hell, I had a friend of mine tell me, older gentleman, tell me a joke that I'll never forget. And it was this summer. It was really hot this summer.
Yes, it was.
Really hot this summer. Global warming is real. So it was really hot. I think it was 115 that day.
Yeah.
And so I looked at him. We were walking early in the morning.
Still laughing.
Yeah, we were walking early.
I'll be here every night this week.
Yes, for sure.
We were walking early in the morning, and he said to me, "You know how we can beat this heat in Las Vegas?" And he said it as though he knew. I believed him. I thought he was going to tell me. I said, "How?" He said, "We could go to hell." That's how we can beat this heat. That was so funny. That I couldn't keep walking.
Yeah,
with
this
him.
would feel cool.
Yeah,
compared
this
to
would
that.
feel cool.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
You got one or two more, and then we got to get
yes,
out of here.
yes.
I got a daughter with strep throat or something.
Oh.
No, she's all right. She needs chicken soup and ginger ale.
Well, as long as it's almost a wrap.
Okay.
Look, everybody watching this has got to look and read every one of your books. I think we ought to do a scroll and put that on our little tape here.
We have
It's riveting.
a domestic and international market. Our students, a lot of our students are in Korea.
Oh,
a lot of
wonderful.
our students are in Singapore. And so we told them to put our podcast on platforms everywhere.
Nice.
So now we're hoping that we have a larger international audience. They've been taught by us, and now their parents can hear the true story and the people that have made this town what it is. Not all of the Hollywood stuff, but real people like yourself and your wife.
Yeah.
Telling the anecdotes that most people would never, ever know.
You're going to get it here.
Well, I'll make one last pitch because in
Your books?
No.
Two best-selling golf books. Tell us about your golf books.
But I
golf?
want to pitch Chagra.
Yes.
Because
Pitch it, yes.
in 46 years, and I've interviewed serial killers,
Yes.
torture guys, death row inmates, and a lot of wonderfully successful people as well. The most interesting, multi-dimensional story that I've encountered in my 46 years in Las Vegas is the Jimmy Chagra drug smuggling, judge murdering, Woody Harrelson's father killing a judge, Oscar Goodman defending him and getting him an acquittal on the murder charge. That story is better than The Sopranos, Tiger King, for Pete's sakes. All these multi-episode series. We got 7 episodes, and every episode has a bombshell in it. And like in any series, we open strong and we close with a cliffhanger at the end of every episode. And so at the end of this pilot, which should be in the can by May or June of 2022, we're either going to make the rest of the thing ourselves, or we're going to partner with somebody with deep pockets to make what I think will be the crime story of the last decade. And so anybody out there that's really interested from a filmmaking standpoint or an investment standpoint in that, I'm just never going to find a better story than that.
No.
Yes.
But you said, told them the title?
The title is Do a Nickel. And,
Oh, yes.
And I know. Everybody says, what does that mean? When I asked Chagra, why in the world did you smuggle marijuana, which is hard to package, it stinks, when you can put $1 million of cocaine in a briefcase, why would you smuggle marijuana rather than heroin and cocaine? And he said, well, back in the 70s, Jack, if you got busted for the powders, you do 25 to life. If you got busted for weed, you do a nickel and be out in 18 months on good behavior.
That's it.
So it's a 5-year sentence. And he said, the risk reward, man, it was right there. I could do 18 months standing on my head, but I didn't want to go down for 20 or 25. Well, he did spend 24 years in prison. And when he came out, he lived under the name James Madrid in a broken down trailer park right down the street from Sammy the Bull Gravano, who was John Gotti's hitman. And Sammy was also living under an assumed name. So on that block, you got 2 of America's most wanted living in these broken down motorhomes, and Fred and Ethel, who are living in between them, have no idea who that guy is who walks to Chihuahua every morning.
Well, he's a nice guy.
He's a nice
Yeah.
guy.
What a nice guy.
Yeah.
And speaking of nice guys, a lot of our friends that own the hotels that came from organized crime, they were nice guys.
Sure.
They were nice guys. A lot of people say that the mob greeted and treated you better
I've heard
than
that.
corporate America.
I've heard that a million times.
Yeah.
I'll take Lefty, Tony, I don't know.
Yeah. No, those guys were a little rough.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I knew a little bit about both of them, but I stayed clear.
Well, we're gonna talk to our audience now. If you like anything that was here, please hit like and subscribe to our podcast. We want you to Google Mr. Jack Sheehan, follow him, and we want to thank you and your beautiful wife for being
Thanks
here.
for having us. It's
What an
been
honor.
fun.
What an absolute honor. Yes.
Absolutely.
This was fantastic.
And we should be hearing some applause. We need an applause button, man. I'm serious.
That's a good idea.
We need an applause button.